Welcome to the Simplified Dentistry podcast. Join us as we discuss clinical, operational, and financial aspects of your practice, help you enjoy life, and dare to simplify dentistry.
Our guest today is Mr. Rob Montgomery. He is an attorney focused on dental legal solutions. Rob lectures widely on dental legal issues across dental schools and dental meetings. He is a co-host of the podcast Dental Amigos with Dr. Paul Goodman.
Welcome back to the Simplified Dentistry podcast. We're fortunate to have Rob Montgomery with us today. I first met Rob through our mutual friend Paul Goodman when I was fortunate enough to be a guest on the Dental Amigos podcast. Rob, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be on the show.
So tell me, Rob, why dental business? How'd that happen?
So Rob's an attorney who somehow got railroaded into doing
dental,
stuff in the dental world.
business. Yeah.
I mean, I've represented dentists as long as I've been a lawyer, and that's for 30 years. And really, but over time, it started to become more of a priority in my practice until it became really the exclusive focus, probably about 15 years ago. And so, I like the dental industry. I've enjoyed working with folks. We love working with dentists. I mean, as a professional, it's always nice to work with another professional. So, I appreciate the profession of dentistry. It's fun to help young dentists transition into practice ownership. It's fun to help retiring dentists transition out of professional ownership. And these are, important transactions for buyers and sellers. And, my buddy Paul Goodman likes to say it's like being involved in these deals is like being involved at the birth of somebody's baby. It's really an important time. And we enjoy being able to support our clients in these transactions. And all the other people that work in the industry, the CPAs, the lenders, the consultants, the brokers, the realtors. We have a good crew of people that we like to work with, and we enjoy collaborating with them. And it's a fun network. And dental's it's a neat industry and profession to service, and I enjoy it.
So, what are you seeing in the industry right now? Obviously, our industry changes a lot, and there's a lot going on with associates going to DSOs and versus working with kind of a single doc. What are you seeing? What are the aspects that you're reviewing the most these days?
Yeah, and are those associate contracts, are they changing? To where it used to be the guys wouldn't do it if they didn't have an option. They wouldn't do this. They didn't wanted a kicker. Are they becoming more commoditized, or is it going the other way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot to unpack here.
Sure.
DSOs have definitely proliferated the industry, and I think unfortunately some of that is, we'll just say it. Dental schools have aided and abetted that. I'm a lawyer, so we'll throw out some legal jargon. They've aided and abetted that process and really promoting and the thought and the belief that there's only one way to go, that these DSOs have taken over the practice of dentistry. And if you don't go to work with the DSO or you don't partner with the DSO, that somehow you're going to be left behind as a practicing dentist. And that's just, as we know, simply not the case.
So Rob, when you said you lectured a lot of the dental schools, is that what you're seeing? That, because when I came through, it was, everybody was going into private practice, and dental schools were anti-corporate dentists. Are you seeing that now they're all on board with the DSOs?
I mean, I've yet to come across any schools that weren't really cozy with DSOs.
Wow.
I think a lot of young associates feel like that is their only option. And we do a lot of review of associate agreements, especially for new and recent grads. And so, Richard, to answer your question, over time, that we have seen that the provisions in those contracts are more dangerous, they're more predatory. There are a lot of traps in there that these young dentists don't realize that are there. And unfortunately, some of the byproduct of that, too, is once DSOs kind of get out into the ecosystem with those kinds of agreements and those sorts of terms, a lot of private practices dentist-owned practices have adopted some of those provisions. So, I mean, I've definitely seen a shift, certainly over the last 10 years, of what the tone and the nature and the vibe of an associate agreement looks like, and it's become a lot, like I said, a lot more dangerous, and a lot more one-sided in the practice's favor over that time, for sure.
I mean, I built the DSO, and I was trying to hire in Charleston, South Carolina, and the one dentist that was kind of, I really liked her. I thought she'd be tremendous for our practice and so forth. She had some restrictions in her contract that were just extraordinarily punitive. I mean, miles, time, penalty, financial penalties. It was huge, and I'm just curious: are those able to? One, my question would be: do those hold up in court? Mm-hmm. And two, are they getting more restrictive or less?
Well, I've always thought that the way contracts are, if it's in the contract and somebody hands you the contract, they're willing to enforce it. Are you seeing that clients are having to defend themselves against people enforcing it?
Yeah, I mean, there are disputes over things that I never seen disputes over before, in the last, up until, we'll say, 7 or 8 years ago. Some of them are non-competes, but a lot of the stuff really deal more with term and termination, where groups are requiring people to work for a fixed term, where the associate doesn't have the ability to terminate prior to 2 years or 3 years, where the DSO has sent them cease and desist letters or even sued them for not living up to that end of the bargain. But I think you're right, Mustafa. I mean, if somebody puts that in the agreement, they're willing to try to enforce it. But what I say, Richard, is whether or not it's enforceable, that just means, is a judge going to enforce it? And in order to get to that point, that means there's a lawsuit that's been filed, an answer has been filed, there have been hearings, depositions. I mean, that could easily cost $100,000 to find out whether or not it's enforceable. And how many associates have the resources to fight that fight? And a lot of times, too, a court could say 15 miles isn't enforceable, but 12 is. And, congratulations, you spent $100,000 on legal fees to knock 3 miles off of a non-compete in a year in the making. But I think even more so than that is, what is the practical impact of those non-competes? Because if somebody's looking to buy a practice or do a startup, lenders aren't going to lend to them if what they're looking to do is within that restricted area, regardless of how unreasonable it is. They could have a non-compete that's 50 mile radius in Charlotte, and everybody could say no judge is going to enforce that. But if they go to Bank of America and say, hey, we want to borrow money to buy this practice, we've got this crazy non-compete. Everybody tells me on Facebook that don't worry, it's not going to be enforceable. Bank of America says, well, come back after the judge has ruled on that. So it really has the practical effect of stymieing entrepreneurial dentistry. Could you go work as an associate someplace else and see what happens? Sure. Can you go borrow $1 million to do a startup or buy a practice in that area, even if it's unreasonable? No, and you can't. It's not like you can also say like, hey, I like that end cap in that retail space for my startup, or I like this possible acquisition. This practice is grossing $1.2 million, but I got this non-compete. Wait a minute, I'll be back in a year after I'm done litigating this. Like you can't put those things on layaway. So again, it has the practical effect of preventing people from being able to do things, regardless of whether or not it's quote unquote enforceable.
You said something very interesting. It's the chilling nature of it on entrepreneurial dentists that want to get out and do it themselves, start a business. They got a vision, and that just chills that so dramatically, I gather, is what you're saying.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, it completely stymies them. And I think ultimately you have to understand that these, non-competes under the law are supposed to be only used to protect someone's business. I mean, that, to protect you from stealing somebody's business or unfair competition. In the dental industry, especially in these types of non-competes with these large groups, really what they are is just retention strategies.
Sure.
That if you have a bad enough non-compete, you can't really go anywhere else. And that's not what the law is supposed to be about when it comes to non-competes. Now, get back to your question from a few minutes ago, Richard. Are we seeing them change? There are some changes. That there are states now that are starting to pass laws that are restricting these non-competes or putting in parameters, if not banning them outright. But that's slowly happening. So we are seeing some understanding and recognition of that. But again, these are really retention strategies. But I think even beyond that, what we see is, beyond just the associate employment agreement, are retention strategies and schemes that relate to minority ownership in group practices, where we see younger dentists buying into one location of a larger DSO. And, again, that is nothing but that DSO trying to make sure that they have a dentist to be able to practice dentistry and see patients there. And from an economic standpoint, those deals rarely make sense for the dentist. They're always very predatory in terms of the non-competes, the dentist's inability to transfer the interest back. There's very little liquidity in those. And really, it's the ultimate just shackling people to a practice with a bad agreement. And it's not entrepreneurial dentistry. I mean, I think this is something I want to make sure it's clear that anybody that's contemplating this, if you think you want to have and own a practice or be a partner in a dental practice, owning 10% of one location of a DSO that has 50 locations is not being a practice owner. That is not entrepreneurial dentistry. That's just signing up for, basically, a retention strategy.
So, Rob, when you see these contracts coming out, our listeners kind of go across the gamut as far as where they are in their practice careers. What are the things that you think docs should be looking at in these contracts that they probably are unaware of the implications of? What are the big bombs?
Yeah, so many things. I think first off is they just have to get good representation, good legal representation. I mean, these contracts are way more sophisticated than an 8-page dentist prepared agreement or something in a private practice, an associate agreement. We're talking about operating agreements, subscription agreements, purchase agreements, management contracts, sub-management contracts. These are sophisticated documents. So, I think ultimately people have to get these things reviewed. And the problem is sometimes they feel like, well, I'm only paying $150,000 or $200,000 for this. Do I really want to spend the money to have a lawyer tell me what's in here and what's not? And it's crucial, because the types of things, to answer your question, are provisions that may say that, you can't, that the DSO, for example, has the ability to purchase the interest back if the dentist is no longer employed, but they may not be required to. But if they do, they may be able to purchase it at a lesser amount or a lower valuation than when the dentist bought in. So maybe the dentist bought in for $300,000, and now the DSO has the ability to buy them out at $150,000 because they're leaving. Where that gets even harder is a lot of times the buyout provisions allow the DSO to term out that payment over time. So it might be they'll pay them with a 5-year note. Well, if somebody borrowed $300,000 from a bank to buy into this interest that is now worth $150,000, and it's going to be that $150,000 is going to be paid off over time. When they do this deal, they owe the bank the balance on that $300,000 loan. Where's that money coming from?
Yeah, they owe the man. They owe the man.
Exactly. They owe the man, but the DSO is not paying them to be able to pay the man. So it's you talk about handcuffs, right? So that's a bad thing. That's just sort of a lack of understanding. But it's really a lack of liquidity in these investments. I mean, owning a 10% interest in, 1313 Mockingbird Dental LLC management is not the same thing as owning stock in Google. You just don't decide one day that you want to sell your interest and you can monetize it. And again, non-competes with these things usually run with while you are a partner and for 5 years after. And so even if you're no longer working in the practice, if the DSO doesn't want to pay you or doesn't want to go into their pocket to cash you out, then you could continually be a member in this thing that's not throwing off any income, not throwing off cash flow, but that is keeping you bound to this non-compete indefinitely. And a lot of times those non-competes in those agreements are even broader than in the employment agreements. They could be 30, 50 miles, or sometimes we even see an entire state. So, really talk about career defining things.
So we talked to a DSO owner or founder at one point in time, and one thing in some of their contracts is the ability to purchase X. And if you purchase this many shares, it gives you the right to have hygiene revenue. Is that just kind of the handcuff that they're throwing in here? That you buy this, you get this, but we also got you. Is that something that you see?
It's putting sweetener on a bad meal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's just putting people deeper into a bad investment. I mean, again, this is nothing but retention for them.
Yeah. I mean the whole goal is keeping a doc in the box.
Absolutely. Yeah. Keep the doc in the box. And this is where, and I have these conversations with our clients, and it's sort of like an aha, they're surprised to hear this. The DSOs are not cutting the dentists into these deals because they want to help the dentists. Like, it's not like they want you to make more money. This is, these guys know how to make money. That's what they wake up and do every day, and so this is for them to be able to make more money and to retain you. And so unlike a typical dentist to dentist deal where you've got an associate agreement for a private practice, or a transition of a practice from one dentist to another, where it's somewhat of a win-win. We call them transitions. They are, transactions where you want your legacy to continue. Very amicable from a professional standpoint, very cooperative. In the DSO setting, their lawyers and the groups that run these things, they want to win these contracts. They want to win these deals. So They very much are stacking the deck in their favor. So, unlike, I know obviously as a lawyer, all these agreements should be reviewed, whether it's with a dentist or with a private equity backed DSO group. But when it comes to the latter, you really have to be careful because there are so many traps in there that are being set up to win the deal, to win the relationship. And, if you're talking about a 28-year-old who doesn't really have a lawyer and is reviewing these documents on their own and doesn't understand this stuff, and this is the first time they've done it, they're the system is set up to beat them.
So what about, I look at these things all the time. You get further down in your career, and let's say you're the 10-year doc or the 20-year doc who's been practicing for a while, and now you're looking at selling your practice. I've just never seen a DSO deal that seems to make sense to me to continue to stay in there. What are you seeing in that? I mean, kind of from what we're talking about, are all DSO deals bad, or do you see good DSO deals?
Let me say one thing, just Rob. I got to say this. I don't mean to cut off what you're saying, but let me give
you
me.
Can cut me off anytime you want to.
Give me one sentence. So maybe as in this dental space, we need to talk about dental transitions and dental transactions. Yeah. Maybe that is the distinguishing term. Because we all talk about all of this as transitions. And to your point that you just said, Rob, this is a transaction if you're doing it with a corporate entity, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so anyway, that's my 2 cents. Go ahead. I'm so sorry.
Yes, I'll just say
Rich, I mean, the document's got the same name, the same header. It's it's the sale or purchase of a dental practice, but that is where the similarities end.
Yeah.
It's a transition if it's me buying Rick's practice, who's been practicing forever, but it's a transaction where it's, Rick DSO buying my practice.
Yeah. I mean, and there's a reason that you spend $30,000 from the documentation to buy the practice.
Sure.
It's exactly what you're saying is they are designed to win that contest.
So are there any DSO deals that are good for the single doc selling into it?
Well, maybe. I think the good thing is, I don't want to be perceived as like anti-DSO. Sometimes people say that, but I think it's that I very much want to be on the soapbox to say, know what you're dealing with and what the lay of the land is. DSOs and those groups provide probably the best possible deal for large practices and group practices. If you have a practice that's doing, whatever, $20 million in revenue, it's got $4 million of EBITDA, you can't sell that to a dentist flat out. I mean, unless it's a super special dentist that's got crazy resources. But I mean, there's no buyer pool for that. There's no audience, so a DSO can do that deal and they can pay $35 million for that. Now, you still have to really be careful what you're dealing with, and these deals are going to be documented like they're a $1 billion IPO with 8 to 10 lawyers from a big law firm working on the other side. But you can protect yourself, if you're working with the right team and you've had the right consulting and you're doing the help, the financial due diligence, somebody's helping you with the cash flow projections. Like in that space, yeah, I mean that they provide a great service to the industry.
They more or less create the market, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it is a market, and that's very different, and that goes back to, when you're talking about transitions or transactions like that. It's, when you're talking about a DSO deal, it's very much a market deal. I mean, they're buying cash flow, they're buying a multiple of EBITDA. That's the way they're looking at it. They're not talking about transitioning the practice, right?
Right.
They're buying cash flow.
As we've had this conversation with a few different people from different perspectives. Let's go to let's say me. I have a $1.5 million practice, 5 ops. What should my exit be? Should my exit be finding a doctor or selling to a DSO?
So now that's the deal where seldom does it make sense, I think, to sell to a DSO. Once you're in that smaller practice, almost invariably, the right deal or the best deal is with a dentist.
Because we had a transition guy tell us that he can't sell a practice like that. I mean, who's
to a corporate to a DSO. Yeah. There's just not enough physical plant, not enough EBITDA.
Yeah.
None of the I'm sure by the time you get ready to quit, you don't want to sign a 5-year employment agreement, right?
No.
So you kind of you can't check enough boxes to make it an attractive. So I think that's what he was telling us that day. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we have DSOs come in. We have some DSOs coming in saying, "Hey, that is the practice I want." Do you believe that?
It's probably not a DSO you want to sell to. I mean, it's just the better run DSOs are going to be ones that are looking to do better deals. And so, if you want to find an emerging DSO that's willing to do, a small deal like that's a big yellow flag for me. I mean, because keep in mind too, when we talk about selling to a DSO versus selling to a dentist, you're selling to a dentist, you get cash at closing, right? The dentist gets a loan, they pay you $1.2 million, money's wired into your bank account, done. Maybe you work for some period of time, but you've been paid. If you sell to a DSO, maybe the purchase price is going to be, the valuation is going to be, $2.5 million, but they're only going to pay 60% of that in cash. Right. It's not all going to be even at closing. They're going to hold some money back, and then they're going to give you 40% of this in equity of the, Bugs Bunny DSO, whatever that might be, and then, so, even though the valuation is high and that seems like a great number, what you're actually putting in your pocket is a lot lower. And then you've got this risk of, I hope this DSO does a recapitalization so I get paid on that 40% that they retained, or that I retained rather. But now if you're talking about a DSO that's willing to do kind of a dumpy little deal in the context of the big DSO world, now is that one that you really have?
I should be offended that you call me a dumpy little deal.
No. Well, it's a DSO from a DSO transaction.
No, I'm just messing with you.
Yeah. I mean, it's got a minimum of that $300,000 or $400,000 in EBITDA, or it doesn't.
Right.
When we looked at it when we were building ours, if you didn't have that in EBITDA, you really couldn't justify the expenses of buying it. The legal expenses,
So if you look, you say like this.
I mean, by the time you have a quality of earnings and the equipment evaluation and all the accounting and everything that goes with it, to buy a practice is a pretty costly event for a DSO.
Yeah, absolutely. And if somebody's doing that or willing to forego that or doing that on the cheap, this is your partner to monetize the remaining 40%. How much confidence and faith do you have in them to be able to get that done? And all of that, guys, is even before you factor in what is the cost of doing the deal, which is, let's say, the delta, just keep the math easy. The delta between being an owner and an associate in this practice is $250,000 a year. And now you have to give them 4 years. You're essentially the cost of that is $1 million of what you're foregoing. You're still going to work every day. You still have to be the one to deal with the issue when the hygienist calls in sick.
You still got to check hygiene. You still got to deal with emergencies. Exactly.
Right. You just make $1 million less. So at that size, that's why these deals don't really make sense for anybody. And so people that are transacting practices of this size in the DSO space, like I said, rarely is that good for the dental practice, and I'm always very suspicious of the DSO that's willing to do that too.
Yeah. So I had a banker trying to tell me that, obviously it would be something that I would want to do because of what you're talking about. The 40% that will recap at such a bigger multiple, and you're going to get a second bite of the apple, and you're going to make so much money. How much are you seeing where are you seeing the recapitalizations? Is that real or not right now?
Very little. Certainly in recent years, we haven't seen a lot of those success stories.
But we had them at one point.
Yeah, last 15 months, it's been pencils down on the recap world. But prior to that, there were many. Yeah, if you look at the various ones, some of the specialty ones especially.
But even then, people are not cashing out on those. I mean, they're still rolling a portion, if not half or more of their equity into that new larger acquirer. It's not like the recap comes and checks are cut and everybody walks away rich. They're still most of the time have to leave equity into that. So
there's rules of exchanging.
Yeah, I guess explain that a little bit. And I talk to a lot of guys and they talk about all these scenarios. And everybody assumes, well, the recap, now I get a pot of gold and I'm gone. I'm drinking Mai Tais. Explain that a little bit.
Yeah. So it's still all these groups do not recap. It's not like a given that's going to happen. There are groups that do it, have a track record, and there's value to that because they know how to do it and they've done it before. And somebody says, they've done 2 recaps. That tells me this is a group that knows how to do this. If you're talking about a group that's a quote unquote emerging DSO, somebody that's never done one of these deals, you may be able to get a little bit more money on the recap because you got in at an earlier stage, but over time. But even then, you have to have confidence that these people are going to be able to do the recap, and it's just not a given. The majority of the DSOs that we see, we don't see them ever making it to a recap. And the groups are just like anything. They're good businesses and know how to do this. They're a partner that there's, when you leave 40% of your equity in your practice with them, that you've got a good chance of getting paid and you may have a nice cherry on top with that. But the smaller ones that don't have a track record, you don't. And I always like to tell clients that you have to like the money and the cash that you're walking away from the table with.
At the closing.
The front end cash, yeah.
Right. And if
Make
you
sure
like
you're
that,
happy with that number.
Right. Yeah. Exactly, Richard. And if the recap comes and there's some home run down the road, awesome. But you are happy with that number. If you're not happy with that number and you're doing a deal solely based on what you hope is the upside in the future, that's really risky.
So, Rob, here's a scenario that I hear people talk about now a lot. They're like, let's 5 of us, 6 of us get together. Let's normalize our values and let's kind of come together as an entity. And then let's try to take that and sell it to somebody. Is that just dentists thinking that they're smarter than people and it's foolish? Or is that a real thing?
Yeah, I mean, that's a challenging thing. I know there are groups that try that. It's challenging just culturally bringing all these practices under one umbrella. The problem that I see, the biggest problem too, actually, is obviously figuring out what the relative valuation is. What is your practice? What is your interest worth? That's obviously something that needs to be negotiated. It's important. But with that even bigger risk for me is when you bring all these people together, all these practice owners for the sole purpose of doing a deal, if that deal doesn't get done, how does that thing get unwound?
Sure.
And what does that look like? We've seen some situations where it's not good watching those things be unwound. So it's sort of like, okay, we're going to try to get this up, and if it doesn't get off the ground, then the whole thing's going to just go up in flames. Is kind of a typical thing. So that is, I think it carries a lot of risk.
Rob, I'm familiar with a deal here in our town where there are 4 practices where, say, let's just hypothetically say each practice has, so they were orthodontic practices. Each practice has $700,000 in EBITDA. And they might get 7 times on that, 6-7 times on that back in the kind of the golden window time. Mm-hmm. Well, what they did is they said, okay, we'll deliver $2.5 million worth of EBITDA, but pay us all on the different multiple. They never did the combining practices thing and value equaling out what's worth what.
They never normalized.
You had 550 in EBITDA. I had 5. You get paid on your 550 multiple. I get paid on my 5. But all of us collectively are bringing a bigger number to the table, so we are all getting the higher multiple. That was how that worked out.
So why would somebody do that, especially if the systems aren't the same?
They never combined the practices. They were always going to be individual practices. They just for the purpose of selling.
So why would a DSO want that? Because you would think that they want kind of systems and uniform practices, and that it is an actual group, because now you're able to put efficiencies on with your opera. I guess I have a hard time. People have brought this to me before, and I have a hard time understanding why that makes sense to anybody.
Well, it's just to get the higher multiple is the only thing.
But will they get the higher multiple?
I mean, I generally typically don't see that. I haven't seen that happen successfully for that reason. I mean, there's a reason why they pay lower multiples for lower EBITDA, because it's a smaller practice, and all the things you guys are talking about. It's sort of, there aren't those efficiencies. You don't have the same systems in place. You don't have the same same kind of accounting and bookkeeping. It's a lot more work for the DSO to do that, and I don't know why they would either.
Rick and I were talking about this earlier today. In the heyday, it was stacking EBITDA. You stack EBITDA and you kind of sell it, and you make a ton of money. Is the stacking EBITDA era over?
I don't know. I don't know. Again, we're talking about a market with this kind of stuff, and unlike the dentist to dentist deals that will always happen, these deals very much are market driven. They're market driven from a structure standpoint. They're market driven from a multiple of EBITDA standpoint. So I'll never say never with any of this stuff.
Sure.
It's very cyclical. So maybe it comes back, but as you said right now, this things have definitely cooled in the last 18 plus months in that space.
Rob, what for the simplified dentistry audience, simplified dentistry kind of caters to what we call the experienced and aspirational entrepreneurial doc. What's your advice for the entrepreneurial doc right now who is looking to kind of expand what they're doing?
I think, if you're an entrepreneurial doc, one of the things that you want to really try to do if you're trying to grow your business is to try to replace yourself as much as possible. I think, my successful entrepreneurial group practice owners are not chairside dentists, unfortunately. And if you like to practice profession, that's great. But if you want to try to grow a multi-location business, it's very challenging, if not impossible, to have a foot in both of those worlds because they don't jive. So, really trying to replace yourself clinically, and then also to try to get good help from a business standpoint, CFOs, other outside people that can help you get to that next stage. I feel like a lot of times there are more younger docs that are considering large practice transitions now than ever before, just because there's the numbers are there. There's a great reward with those. But we have clients, and I think that they're in really good places that have businesses that are well run, practices that are well run. They've got good administrative help, corporate structure, good financial consulting, good clinical staffing, and they're able to run their business a little bit more absentee. And so if you can get yourself to a place like that, you're kind of like your own DSO. You're the DSO of your own practice, and you can make money doing that without having to basically give that cash flow to a DSO. Because again, DSOs do not do these deals to lose money. So, if they're doing one of these deals because it's a good deal for them, and generally what's good for them is not as good for you. But if you're in the situation where you have the ability to put together a good business, and that and it's something that you can sustain that growth because you have a good team, I think that's something that you should consider. And that's an advantage that a dentist has over a non-dentist as you're growing a group practice like that.
As kind of we get to later on in our careers, say the 20-year doc, from a legal perspective, what should a 20-year doc be getting in line before they start transitioning, transacting, whatever it is?
Really depends on the size of the practice, whether we're talking about a large group that's going to be selling to a DSO, or if it's a practice that's going to be more of a candidate for a sale to a dentist or to the associates. I think it's important to start working with a good consultant or a broker in advance of being ready to transition. Get your books together, get your financials together, try to cut overhead, make your practice more valuable. Leases are important too. Real estate issues. What is the transition plan? Or are you going to, if you own the real estate, are you going to sell that to the buyer, or are you going to sell that to a third party group? And if you lease the space, what do your assignment provisions look like? We're in our transition world, I'll say that the number one deal killer is an uncooperative landlord who refuses consent to transfer a lease to a purchaser of the practice. So, and unfortunately, that's something that can always be or should have been addressed in the lease when it was signed, where there would be good assignment language that doesn't require or allow the landlord to have a seat at the table when you're looking to transition your practice. So as you get into renewal and option terms and exercising renewal terms, you want to make sure that you've got a lease that's going to be transferable and is market, and it's going to be something that's not going to cause either stymie your ability to transition the practice, or could lead to having to sell it for less. I mean, again, if we're talking in the DSO world, or even the informed strategic buyer world, where people are buying a practice not based on a percentage of revenue, but on a multiple of EBITDA, or they're looking at the profitability. And if you've been in this space for 30 years and you're paying $10 a square foot more than what somebody is that walks off the street, who's a new tenant, because you've been auto renewing your lease every renewal term, and it's been increasing by 3%. Well, that's a hit on your EBITDA. And, if you're selling for a 6 or 7 times multiple for every, if you're paying $100,000 a year too much in rent over market, that might be costing you $700,000 in your deal. So really getting the lease kind of teed up. And I also say making sure that your associate agreements are nailed down. You've got good non-competes that are transferable and assignable to purchasers of the practice is something else that I think is important from a planning standpoint.
Biggest mistake you see a dental client making?
DIYing this stuff, not realizing kind of what they're dealing with and their need for good legal support and good financial CPA support. And, a lot of these things, these deals really do begin and end with the financial aspect of it. So working with somebody that can help you with the cash flow projections and show you what these deals really mean to you so that before you do the deal what it's going to look like instead of finding out 6 months later. It's like taking what's behind door number 2, and a lot of people do that, and especially in the larger practice world where you get these offers and LOIs and these unsolicited offers from large groups. Your practice has been valuing your practice at $15 million. People think,
Okay.
well, gee, I'm rich. I don't even need to have those numbers looked at. What could possibly go wrong with $15 million? A whole lot, and I could talk about stories and times of, what those deals really look like after somebody's crunched the numbers. But you need to go through that step. And, regardless, we as lawyers can do the greatest legal work ever, have the greatest contracts of all time, but we can't make a bad deal good. And a bad deal is flawed from a structure or just from a financial standpoint, that it wasn't something good to begin with. So, I think people that skip steps, they try to do it on their own, or they cheap out when it comes to these things, are the people that have problems after the fact.
As we wrap up, I'm going to ask you a couple loaded questions. Rick brings you a deal from this buyer. Who is the buyer that you're like, I know Rick's going to do fine?
It all depends what Rick wants, and what Rick's goals are. If Rick is, somebody that wants to still be able to run his practice like he did, like he has for all the years that he's owned it, there are certain groups out there that will let him do that or require him to do that.
And you won't tell us who those are?
What's that? I'm sorry.
You won't tell us who those are?
They're different. Well, it depends. They vary in region and they vary with specialty. There's just so many of these out there. But it's working with people that understand what these different DSOs and models are and seeing what your objectives are. There's no right or wrong answer. There's no like one size fits all for this stuff. It's personal. What do you want? What are your goals financially? What are your goals professionally? Do you want somebody to take all this stuff off your hands, or do you still want to have a hand in it and still control what happens on a daily basis? It depends. But if you can't tell what that is just by looking at the letter of intent, this is where working with a really strong transition consultant or broker adds value, and nobody wants to pay these guys because it's like, why did I pay them 8%? I can do this myself. Somebody sent me this LOI. They didn't find this person. I can just sell it to them and save that fee. They're the people that oftentimes are unhappy after they've done these deals and they find out who they partnered with, because happiness with these things are not always like squeezing the highest valuation or the most dollars out of this. If you're going to have to work someplace for the next 5 years and be absolutely miserable when you used to have a practice that you enjoyed with a team that you enjoyed on a regular basis. So, so much of that, it just depends on the individual.
Last question. Somebody brings you a deal from this buyer and you're like, you got to run from that buyer. Who is that buyer?
I'm not going to say.
That's opening a can of worms that you don't want to even explore.
Now you get a lawyer getting
am I
sued.
taking that bait?
Yeah.
Lawyer getting sued now.
We'll probably cut that question out of this one.
Well, thank you very much for spending some time with us. We really enjoyed it. Obviously look forward to collaborating with you and Paul a little bit more as we kind of move along. And thank you for your time.